gotten the job that I wanted.
Yeah, and students are invested into things like LinkedIn Learning, so it's a question of if students are really doing this, is it going to be applicable when they get ready to apply to the job? And by the
At the same time, it does raise questions about how narrowly these pathways might be defined and whether students are being supported to think beyond job placement and long-term mobility.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation that we've talked about a bit, and you have to help the students to understand what it is.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of This is a Class Project, where we find creative ways to talk about academic subjects in exchange for a grade. I'm your host, Tatiana, a former teacher and current student program coordinator who has assigned multiple projects just like this one and is now engaging in one of those as a student. And my hopes are that if you found this video somewhere on the internet, that you are not only entertained, but you also learn a little something. Today's discussion is going to be all about contemporary issues facing higher education. Right now, higher education feels like it's at a crossroads. Costs are rising, students are questioning whether degrees are worth it, and the workforce keeps shifting faster than institutions can explain themselves. That tension is really what pushed us to do this research. Today we're aiming to answer one core question. How are higher education institutions addressing the value of traditional degree programs compared to alternative pathways, especially amid rising costs and evolving workforce demands? And the answer may not be what you think. Joining us for this conversation today is a practicing Career Center liaison with experienced insight into this topic and my group partner, Jessica. Jessica, we've facilitated an article discussion, we've conducted interviews, and from everything we've looked at, it doesn't feel like institutions aren't trying. It feels like something else is happening beneath the surface.
Well, thank you so much, Tatiana, for that wonderful introduction into our topic. As you said, I think there is something bigger going on, and as we went through this process, there are a lot of things that actually really stood out to me. And the one thing is that these institutions are doing a lot, right? And so I think there are a lot of misconceptions that they're working through. And across all four of those institutions, we saw there were programs and initiatives that are clearly addressing alternative pathways. The real issue is not effort. By no means, it's translation. Students don't understand how these options fit together or what they mean for their future.
Yes, so we did look at 4 different schools on our little vacation down to Tampa Bay. And at USF St. Pete, what stood out to me was how much career and professional development was embedded across the institution, but not always framed as the centerpiece of the student experience.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Career readiness was positioned as everyone's job. Something that I also have experienced in my role. You have career coaches, you need early exposure programs, skill assessments, and these are things that start from the moment that students get admitted and continue on throughout them being alumni. There's, again, we talked about misconceptions earlier, there's always this thought that it stops right at graduation, and that's not the case. But even with that focus, there's still a perception problem. Four-year public institutions are often seen as rigid or purely academic, even when they built in flexibility and applied learning.
Which is where the CAS standard really becomes relevant.
Exactly. As you know, we use the CAS, Career Services Standard, as our foundation for this project, specifically the idea that career services should help students make career decisions, develop competencies, and succeed in a rapidly changing global workforce. Career services aren't meant to be an add-on. The standard positions them as central to helping students connect learning skills and long-term goals, and that connection isn't always visible to students.
And the Career Center has definitely made efforts to make it visible. I mean, they had such a cute little Lego theme in their office. Their whole thing for the year was building your career. I think they said the year before it was like garden theme for growing your career. And we saw job fair signs everywhere.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to be able to come out of that room and say oh, we just got done talking to someone and I can already make that connection. Job fairs are great opportunities for students to apply what they're learning in the classroom to real life opportunities.
Now, that's how we started our trip, and how we ended it was literally the complete opposite. Hillsborough College was easily the most explicit about alternative pathways.
Yeah, and I really love community colleges, and I think Hillsborough does a really great job of providing a direct response to workforce demands. They have dual enrollment, apprenticeships, and some short-term certifications, which are also shaped by some state priorities and policies.
Yes, community colleges are often operating under very specific performance metrics that are tied to workforce development. I mean, the state of Florida loves dual enrollment. Every school across the state is all about dual enrollment. But at the same time, it does raise questions about how narrowly these pathways might be defined and whether students are being supported to think beyond job placement and long-term mobility.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation that we've talked about a bit, and you have to help the students to understand what it is beyond this moment and what maybe their short-term goal is and how the short-term credential can also impact their long-term goals. And so without context of what that pathway is and what that looks like, students just see this as an endpoint versus a stepping stone to where they want to get to. That's where advising and career service becomes really critical for the students and even as alumni, sometimes community partners, which we talked about a little bit when we were at Hillsborough State. That's where advising and helping students see credentials as part of a larger evolving pathway.
Yes, because actually Hillsborough College had a lot of things for people in the community and for adult continuous learning and everything, so that's a good point. Now, in class, before all of this, we had presented on a Bailey and Belfield article about the false dichotomy between academic learning and occupational skills. And I think when we looked at New College, they really embodied the idea behind the false dichotomy, the belief that academic learning and occupational skills shouldn't be separated.
Yeah, so there's this idea, and it's very persistent, I think, across all of these institution types, is that liberal arts education isn't career relevant. We often see these with the humanities majors for sure. But what we saw was a strong emphasis on transferable skills, communication, critical thinking, adaptability, and their model really emphasized career exploration and deep skill development. And this is done through independent study projects and their senior thesis, which was something really new to me and I thought really cool.
As an undergrad.
Yeah, as an undergrad.
So they were also actually very honest though about how difficult it is to make students to see this value proposition, right? Well, communicating that to students and to parents. Especially to students who are increasingly focused on return on investment, structure, familiar metrics like grades, pretty transactional. I do this, you give me that.
Right. Right. And I think what I would want to express is that academic skills are workforce skills. And every time we visited one of these institutions, especially New College, that was such a push that they were like, if I wish my students could understand anything, and even sometimes their parents, right? They're also invested into their careers. But unfortunately, even when the skills are there, students can struggle, right? They struggle to see how they can translate this into a real life career. And they're hoping to really make that connection explicit for them. And so the issue isn't whether it's valuable, it's whether institutions are telling that story clearly, so that way students don't have to be worried about the immediate outcomes once they graduate from college.
Now, a school that I think we both felt like had the best blend and was really good at communicating this value was the University of Tampa. As a place-based institution with strong local employer connections, whose career readiness and professional development is being led by the former chairman of NACE, I felt like they've really kind of figured it out.
Yeah, and so we spoke with Tim, and Tim was phenomenal. And I think even as me as a practitioner in the field, that I can say that I like to think that we're doing things very similar to what UTampa is doing. They also had, like what a lot of other schools had, internships, partnerships, and this was all built upon their undergraduate experience. But what UTampa and what they've done is very unique because they've created their own competencies program called the Spartan Ready program, and this helps students translate co-curricular learning into career readiness. And then again, something else that we talked about was how schools are trying to implement micro-credentials. But we also talked about some of the issues around those credentials, One being that validity, right? Is this going to be valid into the industry that they're going into? What is the standardization? And is it intentional or is it reactive?
Yep. I definitely did a Google course, and I don't think I would have gotten the job that I wanted.
Yeah, and students are invested into things like LinkedIn Learning, so it's a question of if students are really doing this, is it going to be applicable when they get ready to apply to the job? And by the time they apply, is it still going to actually be worth the value? Because again, we're talking about this rapidly evolving workforce. So again, if I'm doing it here in January, by next January, will this still hold any value?
We don't want to waste time. And so I do think UTampa was very clear that the skills matter, but they were cautious about adopting credentials that they don't quite have shared meaning across the industries and all the institutions.
Absolutely. So, coming from my experience, I would say that I've always seen this disconnect with students, and it's not because they don't lack motivation and that they're not coming in. It's just that they lack clarity, right? So, what students want to know is, what skills am I gaining? How does this connect to the job that I personally want, that matches to my major? And is it worth it, right? Because these students are spending some big bucks at some of these institutions. And then we also saw, like at Hillsborough State College, maybe you're relying on funding and you want to be a good steward of that money even still. And so institutions are responding. But again, students unfortunately still don't always see that academic learning and career preparation work together. It's not either degree or an alternative pathway. It's how those pieces build on one another.
And honestly, all of this is why you kind of made for the best partner on this, because with your experience in the Career Center and being a career advisor, you really were able to add on another layer to our research.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. My heart. But from a practitioner standpoint, I will say I see students every day who are just trying to make a smart decision, a decision that, that could potentially impact the rest of their life, definitely their career life. And they're doing this with limited information sometimes. And so we want students to understand, how is this education that they're invested in going to translate into skills, job, and long-term stability, which we both know is very important.
And when that connection isn't clear, students tend to fill in the gaps all by themselves. I mean, when I was leaving teaching, I had to Google what skills do teachers have that could work in another field.
Yeah, and I think it's so funny you say that, because we hear about like students using Reddit and things like that to do so. And so sometimes Reddit isn't going to be the best option to tell you what the value of your traditional degree program is. Because sometimes that information is solely based on a certain time or a certain program, and so students can be misinformed. And what we want is for these institutions to clearly continue to explain what the full picture is. And this is why faculty buy-in is also so important, because students spend a lot of their time in the classroom.
Yes, so if institutions truly align their practice with the CAS Career Service standard, what would change?
Career conversations would be implemented earlier on. We talked about dual enrollment earlier, so as early as high school, programs will be communicated in student-centered language. We would really focus on competencies, flexibility, which is a really big one.
Yes.
I would say a trend for sure, and the outcomes rather than institutional structures.
And that's where the idea of the false dichotomy really matters.
Yes. So once we stop treating academic learning and workforce preparation as competing priorities, we can design and explain pathways that actually make sense to students. Alternative pathways aren't replacing higher education, they're actually reshaping it.
And now the work is just to help students navigate these options with clarity, context, and confidence. Thank you so much, Jessica, for helping me do all of this research and figure out this contemporary issue facing higher education.
And thank you for having me on this podcast episode.
Yay!
That's why I was like, hold on. The Beyonce beat? That was me. I was like, what is going on?
You looked like it was so on point though. Everything